Today on this lesson we will be taking pin, defense and pressure. So let's take a look on the board. So in this example, white rook goes e1. Of course, black protects the knight with f6, but we put more pressure on the knight with pawn f4. For example, black goes d7. We take with pawn, pawn also takes, and we take the pawn. Next, we have white bishop on c4, pawn on c6 from black, and we go with e4, attacking the rook once again. So, for example, black, the only move that they have is f7, king. We take with pawn, black takes, and we take and also put a check on the king. Here we go a7 with the rook, black goes e8, and we go knight to d5, because you cannot go on f5 because the pawn will take and you lose the knight. So that is not a correct move. So we go d5, attacking the knight once again, the bishop once again. So the best move would be pawn f5, then we take with the knight, then rook takes on e7, and we take the rook also on e7. This one is a little bit harder, but still pretty easy. We go b2, black goes h6 for example, and we go on g5. Black takes on g5, we take back, then black, the best move would probably, the only move that they actually have is g8 king, and we take with pawn, for example. Thank you very much for joining me on this lesson, and I hope to see you next time. And if I may ask, please subscribe to this channel. And today we're going to talk about pin. So let's take a look at the board. In this example, the bishop goes e4, attacking the rook. Also pinning the rook, because the rook cannot go anywhere, because if it moves, the bishop will check the king. So the king has to move, for example, a7, and the bishop eats the rook. In this example, the rook goes e7, pinning the knight, so the knight cannot move anywhere. So for example, the pawn goes a5, the rook takes the knight, checking the king, and the king moves to a6. In this example, the queen goes c7, pinning the bishop, so the bishop cannot move anywhere. So the pawn goes, for example, h5, the queen takes the bishop, checking the king, so the king goes to h6. This one is also a little bit harder, so I'll give you a second to think about it, how to solve this, and then I will give you the answer. So congratulations if you found it, and if you haven't, this is how you solve this. You go bishop b5, pinning the queen, so the queen cannot move anywhere. So for example, a black castles, and the bishop captures the queen. This one is also a little bit harder, but you can do it. So here the rook goes e1, pinning the queen once again, and the queen cannot take the rook because the queen is protecting the rook. So black once again castles, and the rook takes the queen. Yeah. Thank you very much for your attention, and Keep practicing, keep getting better, and I hope I'll see you next time. And today I'm going to be talking about spear. So let's take a look at the board and see how it goes. So first we go rook a8, attacking the rook. So the king has to move to avoid the attack on him, and we take the rook, and this is a winning position for white. Let's take a look at the next example. In this example, the correct way to do this is d1, rook, attacking the bishop and the king. So we go d1, king goes e6, and we take the bishop, winning the material. You might think that we can go, for example, a5 to win the rook, but the black bishop can take on a5, so we lose this material. Let's take a look at the next example. In this example we go f3, attacking the knight and the king, so the king has to move, and we win the material. You might also think that we can go, for example, d3 to win the rook, but this is an incorrect move, because after king moves, for example, to c5, we take the rook, and the black knight on b7 takes our rook. So this is just an exchange with no benefits. Here we go e1, because this is the only correct way, because if we go, for example, e2, then the white bishop takes. If we go, for example, e3, then the black knight takes our queen. So the correct way is to go e1, attacking the queen. So the king has to move, for example, to d6, and we take the queen, win the material, and overall this is a winning position for white. Thank you very much for your attention, and I'll love to see you next time. On today's lesson we're going to be talking about destruction of defense. I hope you're having a great day. So let's take a look at the board and see how it goes. So in this position, what we want to do is go b7, checkmate, but there's a little problem because of knight d7 takes. So what we do here is we take the knight with d8 rook, black takes our rook with their rook, and we go b7, checkmate with the queen. Let's take a look at the next example. In this example what we want to do is fork the king and the queen, but the problem is that the bishop on f7 is covering that square. So what we do is we take the bishop with a rook f4, black takes the rook with the pawn, and we go c7, forking the king and the queen. King goes b8, and we take queen on e8. So moving on to the next example. In this example we want to pin the queen, but we can't because of the knight on f6. So what we do is we take the knight with our bishop on c3, black exchanges, and we pin the queen. So in this position what we want to do is pin the queen, but we can't because of the knight. So what we do is we take the knight, black takes the bishop, and we pin the queen. You might think that queen can take the rook, but in fact he can't because of queen f8. Thank you very much for your attention. Keep practicing and keep getting better. I'll hope to see you next time. And on today's lesson we are going to be talking about how to catch a piece. So let's take a look at the board. In the first example we go g3, catching the bishop. Any move that the black does next, for example, king g7, we go king g2, attacking the bishop, and next move, we eat the bishop. In this example, we go king d1. No matter what they do, for example, king f7, we go king c1, they go king e6, we go king b1, attacking the knight, they go, for example, king d5, and we eat the knight. Next example. In this example, we go b3 bishop, catching the bishop. For example, they go king f8, we go king c3, catching the rook, attacking the rook, and next move we will eat the rook. On to the last example. In this example, we go knight f3, catching the queen. No matter what he eats, next move we are going to eat the queen. And on today's lesson we are going to be talking about distraction. So in this first example, what we want to do is make a checkmate on g7 with the queen. But the black queen is protecting that square, so we are not going to do that yet. What we do is we go rook d8, distracting the queen. Queen has to take, and we go g7 queen, checkmate. Next example. What we want to do here is pawn g3 checkmate, but we can't do that yet because the pawn is pinned with the black rook. So what we do is queen e1, rook takes, and we go g3 checkmate. Let's take a look at another example. What we want to do here is promote the pawn, go f8, and get a new queen, but we can't do that yet because it's under control of the knight. So what we do here is go e4, knight takes, and we promote the pawn. Knight takes, and we promote the pawn to the queen. Going to the last example. What we want to do here is take the queen, but we can't do that yet because the king is protecting the queen. So what we do here is a8 rook, king has to take, and we win the queen. On today's lesson, we're going to talk about luring. So let's take a look at the board. What we want to do is fork the king and the queen in the first example. But to do that, we need to lure in the queen. So we do that using the rook, going d7, creating a double attack on the bishop and on the queen. So the queen takes, and we finally fork the queen and the king. King has to move to h8, and we win the juicer, aka the queen. Let's take a look at the next example. What we want to do is fork the queen and the king again, but to do that we need to lure in the queen. So what we do is d8, creating a double attack on the king and on the queen, so the queen has to take. We go c6, knight, forking the queen and the king. Finally, the king has to move to b7, and we take the juicer once again. In the third example, what we do is sacrifice the queen. King takes on b7. We go bishop d4, creating a discovered check and also attacking the queen. So the king has to move, for example, to c6, and 3 times in a row we take the juicer. Going to the last example. We take the knight on e5 with the bishop. Black takes the bishop with the pawn. We sacrifice f7 our rook. Black takes the rook, and we go d5, creating a double attack on the rook and on the king. So the king has to move, for example, e7, and we take the rook.